Right. Okay. So this is about Linux. Closing this one. Next, what we need is Weblogic, FMW Infra Weblogic installer and Weblogic generic installer. So this you'll be getting it easy. So if you click on
What
Weblogic,
is the difference between generic and again fusion middleware? Okay.
yeah. So FMW is Fusion Middleware one, and generic is the one which doesn't come with Fusion Middleware products. So it can be used for anything else. So it's like a difference between a generic and empty. Empty is like multi-tenant one, which is our Fusion Middleware, and then generic you can use it with anything. So you can run anything on top of WebLogic. Okay, just WebLogic if you want, you can run it. But if you want to run something like, let's say, WebGate, you want to use WebGate with your WebLogic, or you want to run SOA with your WebLogic, you want to run OAM with your WebLogic. So for all those, something which requires JRF extensions, you cannot run it with generic versions. At that time, you have to use your Fusion middleware, WebLogic. So depending upon what you need,
Okay.
right, the WebLogic changes. So for example, in this, if you see here, this is the WebLogic installer. This one is our generic. It's not the Fusion middleware one. Okay.
Generic should be there without even fusion middleware also, right? But
Can,
to install fusion middleware, generic should be there. Upon that, fusion middleware should be there, isn't it?
can you repeat that, please?
I mean, so generic is like a base one, and fusion middleware where is upon that generic one, right?
Yes, yes,
Means
exactly. So generic is like, they have kept generic for the reason because earlier versions of WebLogic, it was just WebLogic. There was no Fusion middleware. So Fusion middleware is the extension now. So they have appended a few libraries, JRF files and all, few extra files to support the Fusion infrastructure. So, Oracle is moving everything into Fusion now. And what they are doing now is they want everything to run on top of WebLogic. So WebLogic serves as base, and then rest of their products they run on top of WebLogic. So for that you need some kind of integrations to be done. For that, some extension has been added into this Fusion middleware, and that works smoothly with the rest of Fusion middleware products. So if you want to work with WebSuite, if you want to work with WebLogic Portal, SOA, OAM, OIM. So for all these, Fusion middleware serves the purpose. Generic they have kept because people who are working with 10G, 11G, maybe they are comfortable working with it, and if they have to upgrade for patches or for bugs and everything, but they don't want to go for Fusion middleware because they don't have any need for it, so they can just upgrade to generic version, and they don't want Fusion middleware. So for that reason, it has been kept.
okay.
Now you can see both installer here. You can see this generic one right here,
Yes, yes.
791 MB, and the Fusion middleware, 1.5 GB.
Okay.
Okay, so you can download these two. That's for your WebLogic, Linux ISO database installation. Anyways, we'll have 11G or 12C versions. Anything will do. And then OHS installer. OHS installer, again, it's easy to download. We won't be using it now, but it's good that we keep it so that we can use it in future.
Okay.
So if you go for web tier, this again we can use any of these. We can go for 11G or we can go for 12C also. Let's say we have
Okay.
latest version of WebLogic, so we'll go for 12C. So you just have to select 64-bit and download. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's for your WebLogic. Okay. Let's see. Uh, for today's session, anyway, I'm recording it so Mohan can get it. So let's install a OS today. I'll choose the Oracle 64-bit and I will name it PISP. Okay. Okay, what is the configuration of your laptop? Which
I
is
have, I have 8 GB RAM I have.
okay, 8 GB RAM. So that's good. So I'm making it
And what
full.
is the minimum RAM required for this WebLogic installation?
Yes, so this is what we all discussed in previous session. Let me just go through
Okay,
it quickly for you, okay?
okay,
So this was a prerequisite which we discussed on the other day. Requirements. So processor requirements is 1 gigahertz CPU is what we expect. JDK I have told you 1.7 or 1.8 and respective version as per the you were there on the compatibility matrix session.
uh, yes, I think, yeah.
Yeah, so I think as per that, as per the compatibility matrix, the certification matrix, whatever JDK version based on the product version we choose, JDK version, database versions and everything we have to choose. Minimum RAM is this. So 4 GB is what you need minimum and 8 GB should be available. So yours is 8 GB which will serve the purpose. And then there is a calculation for memory. How do you calculate it? Okay, so this is how it is. So for a development, this is for deployment 3 GB plus 3 GB. Let me show you for production environment. So if it is a production environment, hold on, yeah, development environment first. So we just need one admin server. That means operating system should have at least 3 GB for itself, and for other softwares it is running plus 3 GB for admin server. If we are making a 3 GB admin server, but in our case, considering we have just 8 GB of space, we'll just create server with 1 GB or probably 512 also we can work out with. Similarly,
Okay,
if it is production, then 3 GB, because what happens is in your environment when you have some RAM allocated, some of the RAM is already allocated to operating system and few other softwares, maybe some monitoring tool, some bugging tool or some external tool being already installed on your server. So those tools and those installations will require some memory. So the operating system occupies some memory for its functioning, and then some other tools, let's say you have a firewall running or you have a monitoring tool already in place or a tracking tool which tracks different users usages. So all those tools also internally they require memory. So once those memory is occupied, after that rest of the memory is available for you, which you can use for your managed servers, admin servers and few other things. So for example, in a configuration where we have 64 GB RAM, or let's say 128
okay,
GB RAM, 20 GB will be used by your operating system and other softwares running onto it by default or through extensions. So out of 128 gig, 20 GB is already gone. So 20 GB is already allocated to your machine, to your server. So that means now you have already 108 GB. Now when you create an admin server, let's say you create an admin server with 4 GB. So another 4 GB is gone. Now your server is only with 104. Okay. Now as per your architecture, let's say your organization says that they need 20 managed servers with 4 GB of RAM, 4 GB of heap space. Now you need to find out whether is it possible to keep in this infrastructure. Now let's say if you have 104 GB, you need to calculate 20 into 4, which comes around 80 GB. Now you have 104 GB and you can accommodate 80 GB. So you can confirm that yes, this environment can support 20 servers. Now tomorrow, if they say
okay,
after a month or something, if they say they need 30 managed servers on the server. Now when you calculate 30 into 4, that makes it around what, 120.
120, yeah.
Yeah. So you can tell no, it
Yes.
cannot be done because you will have to upgrade your RAM. So they will have to put additional RAM until they upgrade it. They cannot run it. So what organization need to do is you need to suggest them that 30 servers, managed servers cannot be supported on this system. So they will have to go for a 256 GB
No,
RAM.
no, but actually you're telling space of memory or means hard disk
No, no,
space.
hard disk is different. So hard disk is
Okay,
something.
memory, you're telling 6 GB, 6 GB RAM memory for 2 managed server.
Yeah, yeah, no, that is on this one. I'm saying you are talking about the slide.
Yes, yes. means actually you told that 120 means around 80 GB RAM. How means real time environment you are telling, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was giving you an example of a real-time environment. Saying that,
Okay.
considering that, let's say your client has given you a server with
Okay.
128 GB of RAM. Okay.
Okay.
Now
Okay.
let's consider you log into the server and you check for memory, and that as per the architecture, as per the documentation, it says this server has a capacity of 128 GB. Okay. Now when you log into
Yes.
the
Yes.
server and you click on free, or you type a top command, you find that out of 128 GB, you only have close to 100, 18 GB or 120 GB, right?
Okay.
So you see that
Okay.
18 GB or 20 GB is less. So let's say
Okay.
when you log in, you are only finding that your server shows 105 GB free.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
that means close to 23 GB is already occupied by operating system and your other softwares running. Okay, I'm giving you a rough idea
Okay. Yeah.
because there is
Yes.
something
Yes. Yes.
called swap space as well.
Yes. Yes. Swap space, temp space will be there. Yeah.
Yes, I mean you would have seen in database also, because when you do it, it asks for 8 GB or 16 GB of default swap space. Otherwise, your database installation doesn't go well,
Yeah.
right? So what I'm saying is when you log into the any system, even when you log into your database system also, if it says your server is of 128 GB capacity, you always see less, and the reason for that is operating system occupies some of the memory. Now, what
Yes.
I was
That's
telling
correct.
you, yeah, please continue. Tell me.
Yes. Correct. I understood. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, what I was telling you is, if your client provides you with the documentation, the pre-planned architecture, where it says, we are planning to host 20 servers on this machine with 120 GB RAM capacity. Now, when you go for implementation, first thing is you need to find out whether this server is capable of running this environment. Okay. So, first thing you need to consider is memory and the disk space requirement. Okay, so let's say if client has
Yes.
given you 128 GB and just 50 GB of disk space. Okay, 128
Okay.
GB and 60 GB disk space. Now when you check it,
Okay.
memory is 100 and let's say 5, what is what you are seeing on your screen, and this space also it shows you complete 60 GB, that's free. Now, when you go for 20 managed servers of 4 GB each, so that means each of these servers will occupy 4 GB on your server. So
Okay.
the first
And
server,
how you are telling that means it occupies means how I can find that okay one managed server will take 4 GB or 5 GB. How it can be means
yeah, okay. So
how
that
it can be.
that depends upon your application. You know the thing you deploy. Let's when we go for a deployment. Okay. So depending upon the
Okay.
kind of
Yeah.
application, let's say it's a finance application. Okay, and it generates
Okay.
when you run that application, it generates some set of codes, and that of set of codes internally will have a memory arguments defined for running that piece of code, the piece of software. Now when some processing goes on, the developer or during the planning stage, they know how much memory this process will require. Let's say it is a memory extensive process, then definitely it cannot work with a low memory, right? So let's
Yes.
say
Yes. Correct.
okay, for example, I'll give you a very basic example. When you run a game, you got a very good game. Okay, let's say GTA 5. Okay, now you're trying to run that GTA 5 on your laptop with 2 GB RAM. Okay, and there is no graphics card. So you just have 2 GB RAM and you're trying to run that game. Your system hangs. The reason being that game is not supported on that particular system. The reason being the graphics which are in place, they require more memory. Now same thing when you run with your 8 GB or 16 GB laptop, it works fine. The reason being it gets the resources. So similarly in a WebLogic environment, when you do a deployment, it comes with some resources which needs to occupy memory, disk space on your environment, and that thing is defined in the code you deploy. So when you know about your application, you know how much memory is required. So for example, if you don't have anything running on your server, you can just go with 512 or 1 GB of RAM. That works fine. But when your application comes in and you just have 1 GB of managed server and you deploy your applications and you try to trigger it, either it will be very slow, or when it runs, it will hang, because the team who has designed it, they say this has to run on a minimum of 4 GB RAM. So it depends upon the kind of application you are running.
Okay, understood. Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
all on your application you run. For example, even database you consider, the previous versions of the database would have required lower memory, but the new versions requires more memory because they are coming with add-ons for the in terms of database availability. You have ISM added, so many things comes in new. So for that you need extra bit of memory for functioning. So depending upon what kind of software it is, you need a default memory for it. So what I said is 4 GB because most of the servers which runs on production and the application, the industry level, enterprise level applications, they require this for functioning of their servers. So 4 GB is minimum. That means to run that application on one managed servers, it can run with 4 GB. Okay. Now why we go for more
Okay.
servers? Because we want to have load balancing, we want to have a scalability, we want to make it robust. So for that reason, we create more number of managed servers. But minimum they define only for one managed servers, and then it's all depends upon organization capacity, how much managed servers they can put based on the server they procure. Right? That makes sense?
Yes, I understood now. Yeah.
Okay, so I was just giving you the example of the actual environment. When you get in, how do you deal with it? How do you define whether this server is capable of running your WebLogic environment or not? Okay, so like I said, if you are seeing 105 GB so memory is free on your server, and your organization says that 20 managed server is what they need to run on this system. Now when you calculate 20 into 4, that makes it 80. So you know that you have 105 GB and 80 is you will be utilizing. So still you have close to 20 GB free. So exactly to be 17, but that's free for your functioning, operating system functioning. So you're good with it. But tomorrow, if your organization says that they need 30 managed servers, you can easily tell them that your server is not capable enough to handle it. The reason being, if you add in 30, which makes it 30 into 4, is close to 120 GB. That means they will have to go for upgrade. So this is how you calculate. So that's an example. So similarly, this has been given for this. If you go for a production environment, 3 GB they have allocated for operating system and other software, 3 GB for admin server, and 6 GB for two managed servers. So that means 3 GB each. That makes it 12 GB. So that's how you have to do a calculations even on your real world scenario.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, this is about temporary disk space. Okay, so although we need disk space on our environment, so this space is actually the mount points where you put your binaries. So when you do your installation, so there will be one mount point for your software to be pushed. It can be same or it can be different, but there will be a mount point where your WebLogic will be installed. So that should have enough space. That is one. But this temporary disk space is a prerequisite. That means as soon as you launch your WebLogic installation. So when you launch your WebLogic installation, at that time it gets extracted to a temporary location, which get extracted, it does its task and then it deletes all file. But for that extracted files to be loaded, at least 2.5 times space is required. So if temp space is less, then your WebLogic installation fails. So this is what you'll have to check. It will complain you that you don't have enough space in your temporary location. So you can go for either a cleanup, and if cleanup is not possible, maybe it is owned by root or you have some very important files for some reason you have kept in temp, then you cannot do that. In that case, you can also specify temp location while trying to install it. Okay, so how do you do it? So in case your temp is full and you cannot run it with default temp, you can use something like this. So while triggering your installation, you can specify a temporary location yourself. So this is in case of Windows, and this is in case of Linux or Unix system. So while running the installation, you can specify a temporary location. So that means it won't use the default location, instead the customized location which you are providing while trying to run it. Okay, this is for running your universal installer. So you will have to check this SHM max kernel parameter. If it is not set to this value, you can set it in this file, conf file, and then once it is done, you can activate it by running this command. And these are the minimum requirement for running your or universal installer. So for Windows or
Okay.
Unix, CPU speed should be at least.
SSM max means something. Actually, there is some. What is the actually meaning? The session max.
It
Not
is
right.
shared
Yeah.
memory max. Okay, shared. There is something called shared minimum, shared maximum. Okay, so it is all defined at kernel level. So it deals with, kernel is the one which is the heart of your Unix operating system, and anything you run, eventually it goes to kernel, and kernel executes is based on resources. So a few of the settings, I think same thing you have in database. When you go for database installation, you have few settings for the
Yes.
kernel,
There are. Yes. Yes.
right, which have to be done before you install your database. So similarly,
Yes.
this is all related to kernel parameters. Mainly it has kernel parameters.
Okay. Yeah. Fine.
Okay, and this is specifically for your OUI, so Oracle Universal Installer. For running that, what you need. So this is one thing you should check. Although it doesn't affect much, but just in case you are finding an issue while trying to run it, you can check for this. And then these are the other requirements which should be there. So you should have CPU speed of at least 300 megahertz, monitor by 256, that will always be there by default. Swap space 512 MB should be there. JDK 1.7 or 1.8 you should have, and temp space. So temp space is always required for any of this installation. Okay, this is for your RCU, which eventually runs everything on database. So your database, when you work with 12c, it should be at least 11.2.04 or higher, or it should be 12.1.01. Okay, there is one difference I'll tell you in terms of WebLogic. This is, yeah, character set also is there, AL3U2TF, so it should be this one for database. Okay, in terms of WebLogic, on earlier versions, 11G and all, so we need to download RCU separately. So what we were doing is we were installing the required softwares, and RCU were getting differently. So we were downloading RCU separately and then running it. But 12C it is different. So now what happens is 12C, whenever a version comes up, you download a version, 12C versions, RCU comes with default. So you don't need to download RCU separately anymore. So that's one good thing with 12C. Because there were many times, there were chances that you download a different RCU and then it becomes incompatible with your current version of software, and then we were seeing issues. Okay, this is
Okay. RCU means something.
RCU is like,
But actually, what is that? RCU.
okay, so it is like a repository creation utility. So what happens is when you run RCU, and this is for your all Fusion middleware products. So when you run your RCU, it creates some set of schemas. Okay, it creates schemas into database. So it's same as, there are different ways to run RCU. If you have system DBA privileges, you can provide it by trying to run that RCU, and once you provide that database credentials, so it will take your database credentials like your host name, your username, password, port number, and everything. Once that is passed, it creates a set of RCU schemas. Okay, so that will be something like the way you name it: MDS schema, UMS schema, so OPSS schemas. So all these schemas, they'll be created in database. So RCU nothing is but it is a utility which creates schemas into your database, which is required for configuring your domain for all your Fusion middleware products. So this is one facility, because there is one way: either WebLogic guys can create schemas on their own if they have access. Otherwise, let's say if there is an environment which is restricted, okay, where DBAs, they don't allow their user to create RCUs, then what they can do is, by running this RCU, they can generate the scripts, and those scripts they can pass it on to DBAs so that DBAs can run it for them. So end of the day, it generates schemas. So it creates schemas into the database, which eventually will be used by Fusion middleware products for its functioning. And every schema serves a different purpose. So it mainly creates schemas into your database, which is used by Fusion middleware products while after configuration and for functioning of its environment. Okay.
Okay, yeah, understood.
Okay, and these are the RCU requirements. So this is at database level, but as I told you, RCU creates schemas at database. So these things should be checked at database level. So, share pool size, share SCA max size, DB block size, session cache cursor. So these are the parameters we can check for. Okay, this is about, now it is about disk space. So for Oracle HTTP server, 1.5 GB for standalone, 1.5 GB for collocated mode. Similarly for
Collocated in the means, is it like the cluster something?
okay, so standalone means you, yeah, I'll tell you. So standalone means you run the HTTP server outside your domain. So HTTP server runs on its own. So you don't integrate it and anything. Collocated HTTP server means you run an HTTP server. HTTP server can get integrated to Weblogic also. So what you do is when you run this HTTP server, and this we will see when we will install it. So it gives you option that do you want it to make it part of, if you go for collocated, it will ask you for WebLogic admin and port. If you provide that admin and port, this HTTP server becomes part of that WebLogic and a server is being added into WebLogic. So that means this HTTP server which you are installing on collocated mode can be controlled through WebLogic domain. Okay. Otherwise, in standalone HTTP server, it is outside your WebLogic and it has its own control. It doesn't depend on anything. But in this mode, you make it visible to WebLogic and you make it integrated with WebLogic so that this can be controlled through Fusion middleware control and through admin console. So that's the difference. So standalone is outside your WebLogic and collocated is inside within your WebLogic. So you integrate it mainly with your WebLogic so that WebLogic can control.
There will be separate server. There will be separate server for standalone HTTP server, and there will be WebLogic server will be in separate server, right? Standalone.
Okay, so it's not like that. See, it's server. When you say server, that means you're talking about the box, the actual box where you're installing, right? The Linux box where you're installing.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yes.
it depends upon your architecture. You can have separate server also. Okay. If let's say because sometimes organization they will have a different box for your web server. So in that case, yes, your HTTP server will be on different box and your WebLogic will be in different box. But at times you can have both on the same box as well. In case your organization they have not given a separate box for a HTTP server, then you do it on the same box. Now
Okay.
the thing will be same, although you will be doing installation for HTTP server on a different box, but still there will be two options. You can have standalone and you can have collocated. So if you're going for a standalone, that means on that particular box, this HTTP server is running on its own and it will handle everything on its own, startup, stop and everything. But when you do collocated mode, that means you are attaching this HTTP server to WebLogic server. So in case, let's say on a host A, you have WebLogic and host B, you have HTTP server. If you go for collocated mode, then your this HTTP server, you will assign admin server and manage admin port of this WebLogic server host A to this HTTP server. So that means although this is on the different server, but still WebLogic server can control it. So it can start and stop HTTP server, it can change it. But in standalone mode, WebLogic is not responsible for everything and HTTP server takes care of it on its own. Okay, so that's the difference. But it can be on any server.
Okay, I have one doubt.
Yeah.
In the sense, if you means actually web server is different, application server different. Some first actually application server should be brought up. After that, WebLogic should be brought up. But in this case, what you are telling means in correlated mode, no need of bringing separately application server. If you bring up application, means if you bring up a web server, automatically it will bring up WebLogic also, right? Kind of concept only, right?
Okay, so I'll tell you what happens. So when you say collocated mode, so WebLogic server will have its admin servers, okay, and then it will also have its managed servers. In addition to
Okay.
that, it will have HTTP server, okay. So your WebLogic provides a facility that you can start your managed servers as well as HTTP server, but your HTTP server still resides outside your WebLogic domain. Okay, so what you do is actually, so when you make collocated mode, your HTTP server becomes part of the same domain. Only thing is, it becomes part of same domain, and in a standalone mode, it will be outside your WebLogic domain. So the difference will be when anything becomes part of a domain, it can be managed through your WebLogic console. When it is outside your domain, it cannot be managed through your WebLogic console. So that's the difference. So when you say about the
Okay.
startup and stop, yes, you stop your managed servers first and then your admin server. And while trying to start, your admin server first and then your managed servers. So in this case also, you will have your admin server, your managed servers, and HTTP server running. So when you stop it, you have a choice. If you don't want to stop your HTTP server, you don't need to, because that each server is different. Your managed server will be serving your application, but your HTTP server here will be acting as web server, which manages your web service. So if required, you have to start it. If not, you don't have to, because you know what happens in a domain, you can have different set of servers. So one managed servers, let's say you can run your HR function. In the another managed servers, if required, you can run your web service. In another managed servers, you can have your finance operations running. In another managed servers, you can have your tele applications running. So now, depending upon your managed servers, the kind of services they are running, and which services required to be stopped or started, you can choose that particular managed servers and start it. So in case you want to go for a full bounce, the complete bounce, then you will have to stop everything and start everything. And in that case, you have to follow this structure.
Okay.
So was that your doubt, that HTTP server you want to start or it is mandatory to start?
Actually,
No, no, you can ask it, no problem. I
I
can
think,
clarify it for you.
actually, I think still I have a little bit doubt, but unable to express it.
No, no,
I
tell
still
me
have a
what
little
exactly is your doubt. So you are saying that HTTP server, so it is, what you're saying is HTTP is your web server, right?
yeah, HTTP is web server,
Mm-hmm.
and you are telling right, collated means standalone in the sense it is not a part of domain. It's means it's not a part of domain. It is separate from domain.
Yes,
So
standalone is separate from domain, correct? That's right. That your understanding is right here.
yeah, collated means it is a part of domain. So means we can start it and start. We can stop and start it when domain is started, right?
From
That's
WebLogic.
what I understood.
Yes.
Yeah, that concept only I understood, but still. Okay, okay. What is actually means if it is not a part of domain, actually what happens?
Okay. See,
Means
I'll tell you what happens is when web server is getting installed. Okay, it will have its own set of script for startup and stop. Okay. So it is one piece of software which can manage itself. So HTTP server you are installing, you can start and stop on its own. So in the standalone mode, it means it has control of its own. So you can start and stop anytime, you can manage it the way you want. But
okay,
sometimes people want it to be part of WebLogic domain so that they can, control everything from one console. So they don't have to go for web server separately. They don't have to come for WebLogic domain separately. So in that case, they want
okay.
put it in collocated mode so that everything can be managed from admin console. Just for that reason, consider it that way. Okay. So HTTP
Yes,
server
yes, yes.
still will have, even if you are putting it in collocated mode, HTTP server still will have its own set of scripts for running and stopping, starting, checking for status and all. But only thing is you are giving a facility to WebLogic so that you can manage it from administration console instead of managing it separately. For that reason, you assign it to HTTP server. So that's the difference. So they are just giving you a facility. You can make it part of your WebLogic domain, and you can keep it outside. So let's say, for example, when they put it on other server, when they have a dedicated managed server, most of the time they keep it standalone. They don't want to manage it from WebLogic. But when it is on the same, at that time they can keep it in the same, they can put it in WebLogic domain, or they can keep it outside WebLogic. So it's all again, from organization perspective, how they want it. They want to make it part of WebLogic domain, or they don't want to make it part of domain. Similarly, there are a few other softwares also which you can make part of domain. Any other software which you are installing other than OHS, any other thing. If you want to make it part of your WebLogic domain, you can assign this administration console, admin port and IP, and then it becomes part of your domain, and it comes as additional managed servers, and that can be managed from your WebLogic console. So just for managing it through WebLogic console, you are adding it into it. So that's the thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So what your
Yes,
exactly your
understood.
confusion was?
No, actually, I didn't understand what actually standalone collocated means. Actually, when I heard about it's a web server, normally uh, I worked on PeopleSoft application. Okay, there actually we will as WebLogic means web server is a separate means it will be in separate domain. It will be in separate server. Okay.
Yeah.
So first we will bring down the web server, then application server, then database. Like that it goes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So see, PeopleSoft, it is different because its architecture is different. Okay. So there,
Yes,
yes, you
yes.
do it that way when you do a startup and all, because database, application, and web server is different here, and its purpose also is different. Okay. So you follow that sequence in PeopleSoft, but here the architecture is different because the software itself is different. When you install PeopleSoft, everything comes integrated. Okay. So they are part of it. So web server is mainly used for your presentation services in PeopleSoft. Okay, database server is your database part, because mainly it's about application server and web server, and one of these is independent also. So you follow that sequence, but here it is different, and it is all about managing. It's more like you have to decide you want your OHS to be part of domain or not. If you want to make it part of your domain, you should do installation in collocated mode. If you don't want it to make a part of domain, then go for a standalone. That's all.
Okay. Yes, yes.
Okay, just for that reason.
Yeah, but yeah, it should be server since it's a web server only, right?
Which one?
ಇವಾಗ HTTP server you are telling, right? It's a web server only, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's web
any
server.
different.
So it is called OHS, popularly known as OHS, Oracle HTTP server, and this is web server.
Okay, yeah. Yes, fine. I'm okay now. I understood the concept.
Okay, so that's the display is given for that. This is for your Fusion middleware, and Fusion middleware is the examples. This for that, this space for that, and this is for your WebLogic server and coherence. This is same as your RCU, all related to database.
Okay.
This is for IPv6 and IPv4 addresses, Oracle Application Development Framework, OHS, and WebLogic. These three software, they are supported on both. They are supported on IPv6 and IPv4 addresses, both of them. This is for entry into EDC host, but this we can see when we are putting it into host file, and this and you may already be aware of, but we can still see that later.
Yes.
Yes, tell me.
Yeah, I just told that I know about the ETC host files. Yeah.
Yeah, because that is like very basic. Everyone puts the entry into EDC host, and this is for ls OF, the number of open files to check in your system. This is a process limit which you do for your number of open files and number of OPS process limits, which you can set software and hard limits.
Okay.
And then this is the software. So do one thing. Anyways, we were late for today. Tomorrow, let's get it started by 7:30, and we will do with this. We start with the Linux image installation. So you get it downloaded today. Okay. So when we do it tomorrow, you can follow it. Okay.
Okay. Yes, yes, I do.
So you get so primary thing is you will have to have this, get the virtual box, get the Linux ISO image, and then get these JDKs. And if you can download these two as well, it's good, because if Linux, we can complete it fast tomorrow. Everyone in the same page. If that can be done, we will go on with WebLogic installation as well
Okay.
for tomorrow.
Yes, yes, fine then.
Okay. So let's catch up at 7:30 tomorrow, and let's start.
And anything about PeopleSoft? Means, have you worked on, or you know the log?
Yeah, I've
Means
worked
idea.
long back here. I've worked about some, I think 5-6 years back.
Okay.
Okay,
Mm.
at that time,
Okay.
like it was, I was used to work bit of coding earlier in PeopleSoft, and then moved to admin. So at that time, it was same thing. We were supporting these PeopleSoft applications. So that's how I know. But it was long back. So I just had this idea when you told about sequence, following the sequence for starting and stopping and manage servers. Because there was a time I created a script, automated script for starting it. So you just have to choose an option. You run that script and choose which server you want to stop. So something like that. But
Okay.
nothing much beyond that.
So
That's all.
okay, you are a developer in the means in the beginner
Okay,
in the beginning.
I worked in different profiles. I worked in development. I worked in production support also. Maintenance and enhancements. And now, like, I'm working completely admin, like middleware. I'm into middleware admin. So it's like I'm working as a consultant now. So I work with all these Fusion middleware products and cloud. So cloud in terms of AWS and few other things. So it's a consultant role
Okay.
now. So it's different now.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay then. Fine.
So what's your
Okay.
experience?
Bye. I'm having around 5 years. 5 years in experience. Mainly in database only, but since 1.5 year I'm working as PeopleSoft admin. Again, but PeopleSoft is going, so again I'm putting in. I'm asking. Have been asked to provide a WebLogic admin. Uh, means means told to work some WebLogic servers
Okay, okay.
to handle servers, but whatever the training they have given, I didn't understand much. So I'm difficult. It's difficult to handle with this with that much of means having that training.
Yeah. So I think I'll tell you
So
this.
that's what I thought.
What personally you can decide on your own, but WebLogic is always much better than PeopleSoft, because PeopleSoft anyways it has a limited capability, and it's like a old age technology. And if you
Yes,
can
it's
move
old.
into
Yeah.
WebLogic, you can move into further Fusion middleware products, which will help you in your future to expand your horizon, and getting further better jobs as well. So that is what I can tell you at this
No,
point.
no, I'm interested for development. Okay, but currently I don't have any options. So I wanted to learn, because after that I'm actually planning to move development. Since in 5 years I'm in infrastructure field. I'm already means planning to move development,
Okay, okay. So
any
you have plans to go for
Java
development.
something.
Okay,
Yeah.
you can plan for DevOps.
Let's
It's
see.
a better technology these days. So it's gives you both, because you already have a knowledge of infra, and if you can learn some coding skills, you can move into DevOps, and that's a better profile.
Okay. Yeah, currently, but this is become mandatory for me, so I had to learn some logic. Let me learn this. In the meantime, I will concentrate that also. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. I mean that's one step at a time. So that's of course I'll tell you. So that is good. So
Yes,
good.
yes.
You have your plans clear for future. That is really good. And okay, so let's get it started tomorrow, and let's start with the installation tomorrow. Okay.
Okay then. Okay. Bye.
Sure. Bye, man. Have fun.
Okay, thank you. Bye.